The world was silent, breathless. In a sterile police interrogation room, morning light sliced through frosted glass, falling cold and blue on the billionaire's wrists, each hand cuffed, unmoving, fingers splayed in disbelief. No one spoke. On the other side of the glass, a small boy of about 6 stood with wide, trembling eyes, silent and unmoving, his face pressed to the glass. The man stared at the child, eyes rimmed with red, jaw locked. A chill danced through the air, an empire built on certainty, now surrounded by doubt and sterile linoleum. Every heartbeat felt thunderous, echoing louder than the clock that ticked with relentless mechanical indifference. The billionaire's suit was perfect. Deep charcoal, silk, sharp lines against his tall, broad-shouldered frame. Mid-30s, male. His face a mask of shock and hollow sorrow. The boy was dressed simply, dark jeans, a faded sweater, his hair mussed from anxiety, lips trembling as he searched the billionaire's face for answers. Nothing moved except their locked gazes, one of hope, the other of devastation. The world outside bustled, oblivious to this confrontation between fate and regret. A voice unseen and haunting whispered through the silence, "He built an empire, but he couldn't save her." Time stretched. Nothing made sense. The paradox of power and helplessness filled the air, freezing the world in place. The billionaire's heart thundered in his chest, his world reduced to the metallic scrape of his own cuffs, and the reflection of that fragile boy. No one offered comfort. The detectives whispered, their faces blank, methodical, as if the fate of empires and children was just paperwork. The boy did not cry. His eyes searched the man's face for a flicker of recognition, a lifeline of warmth. The billionaire's mind raced, regret, panic, and a protective urge all tangled within him, leaving him frozen, voice locked behind clenched teeth. No answers came. The only movement was in their eyes, questions without words. The room felt like a vacuum, every sound muffled, air sharp as glass. Through the cold pain, it was as if the man and boy reached for each other across lifetimes, bound by an unspeakable loss. The clock marked each second with brutal finality. The billionaire wondered if this was how empires fell, not in explosions but in silence between a man and a child he could not save. Shadows lengthened, faces blurred, but the pain was crystalline. The voice echoed again, "He built an empire, but he couldn't save her." All the power in the world, and now he was powerless. Somewhere in the city, a newspaper fluttered across the pavement. Untouched, a headline screaming about a scandal no one truly understood. The billionaire's empire had seemed unbreakable. Until this moment. He recalled nights spent awake in penthouses above the world, believing no force could touch him. But here, his power vanished under the weight of that child's gaze. Memories flickered, echoes of a forgotten promise, a lost love, a woman's laughter, long vanished from his life. The cold edge of the table pressed into his wrists, reality biting hard. In his mind, the billionaire heard her voice, soft, full of hope, cutting through the harshness of police suspicion. He wanted to speak, to reach for the boy, to explain, but all he could do was stare. Regret pooled like ink in his chest. The empire's steel and glass could not shield him from the ache of what he'd lost. In this sterile room, everything he was, and everything he had built, was stripped away by a single, silent accusation. He had failed to save her. The officer's questions fell like stones in water, every word sending new ripples of dread through the billionaire. He hardly heard them. The child on the other side of the glass seemed to fill the whole room, his small presence eclipsing even the harshest accusations. The billionaire's mind split between the relentless present and the echo of a woman's smile, a memory both precious and damning. He remembered a promise whispered long ago, "I'll always protect you." But in the dim light, the weight of the handcuffs and the emptiness in the boy's eyes, he knew that promise was broken. His silence was not defiance, but surrender to a grief deeper than any court could judge. The room was colder now. Every surface reflected his failure, glass, metal, faces, and that small, hopeful soul beyond his reach. Regret tightened around him like a shroud. Even the detectives paused, uneasy in the presence of an empire brought to its knees by love and loss. Outside, the city moved on, cars honking, phones ringing, lives colliding and separating at random. But in the glass tower of the billionaire's world, time had stopped. No power, no wealth could buy him a way out. The man who had been untouchable now sat utterly alone, every inch of the room an accusation. The boy's image, fragile but unyielding, anchored him in the present, forcing him to confront the moment he could never change. In that silence, the billionaire was more exposed than ever before. Every secret, every failing illuminated in the sterile police light. Somewhere distant and unchangeable, the voice whispered its last. He built an empire, but he couldn't save her. The paradox was complete. He had everything, except the only thing that mattered. Before power, before headlines, before the world carved him into a cold icon, there was just a boy. Rain battered the windows of a cramped apartment, lightning flaring briefly to reveal peeling wallpaper and worn linoleum. The billionaire, then only 6 years old, sat huddled on a threadbare couch, knees pulled to his chest, eyes fixed on the front door. Each thunderclap echoed in his bones. Across the room, his mother, mid-30s, tired but beautiful, dark hair falling in loose waves, dressed in a faded supermarket uniform, paced with a phone pressed to her ear. She pleaded for work, her voice thick with desperation, her hands shaking as she clutched a crumpled resume. The boy watched her, heart pounding with shame and longing. He whispered a silent promise to himself. I'll never be powerless. I'll never let her suffer. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within. Every hope and every fear condensed into this single electric night, forging the wound he would carry forever. The promise hung heavy, both curse and shield, even as the boy's mother finally slid to the floor and wept. The boy's mother's voice cracked as she pleaded with another employer. I can start tonight, please. He needs medicine. The boy flinched at her words, his shame deepening, cheeks burning in the dim lamplight. The mother glanced back, trying to smile, but her eyes betrayed her, red-rimmed and hopeless. She ended the call with shaking hands, phone trembling, as it hit the chip table. We'll be okay, she said, voice thin and forced, but he knew better. The boy rose and padded silently to her, wrapping thin arms around her waist. She knelt, holding him so tightly, it almost hurt. You're my whole world, she whispered, forehead against his, eyes closed against the storm. The boy's silent vow hardened. He would build something no one could take away. He would never let anyone see them break. Lightning flashed, freezing them in a frame of longing fear and a desperate kind of love. Years passed, but the sting of that storm never faded. Even as a teen, the boy's gaze was always sharp, watchful, calculating, searching for weakness in every room. He aced tests, skipped parties, worked odd jobs with adult intensity. One evening he watched his mother, older now, wearier, return home from another shift. Her hands were raw, nails bitten. How was school? She asked, smile brave, eyes distant. Fine, he lied, burying report cards in his backpack. He studied her face, tracing every line earned from sacrifice. The boy vowed again, in silence, to lift her above all this. Outside, the city roared, uncaring, but inside he burned with a fire made of shame and love. His mother never knew the scale of his ambition, or how deeply her struggle shaped him. One afternoon, the boy returned home to find his mother sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by rejection letters. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she stared out the window, hands folded, shoulders hunched in defeat. The boy's heart twisted. We'll be okay, she said quietly, as long as we have each other. He nodded, but inside something snapped. He spent that night awake, plotting futures in the glow of a second-hand laptop, his fingers racing with hope and anger. In the silence, he mapped out a life where no one could say no to them ever again. He would build, conquer, and rise, not just for himself, but for her. The seed of ambition was watered with pain and love, growing wild beneath the surface of every ordinary day. By the next dawn, the boy was changed. Sleep-starved and resolute, he dressed before sunrise, eyes shadowed but bright. He kissed his mother's forehead as she slept, her brow furrowed even in dreams. As he stepped into the chill morning, he carried only a battered backpack and a plan. The city was waking, buses rumbling, shops opening, rain-washed sidewalks shining. He walked into that world with nothing but resolve, ready to rewrite his fate. The memory of his mother's pain was the stone in his shoe, the fuel in his veins. Every step away from home was a promise. He would not fail. He would never let love and hope be crushed by the world. As the sun broke through the clouds, he disappeared into the city's heart, a spark in the storm. The boy had become a man driven by relentless ambition. Now, in his early 20s, he worked long into the night, under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights in a cramped startup office. Sleepless nights blurred into early mornings, the hum of computers and whispered deals his constant companions. His sharp eyes scanned spreadsheets, plans, and projections, searching for the breakthrough that would change everything. Birthday parties were forgotten, friends left behind, replaced by the cold glow of a laptop screen and the sharp sting of loneliness. Despite every sacrifice, every sleepless hour, the taste of success was bittersweet. Hollow victories in boardrooms that echoed with the absence of laughter. His mother's faded photo sat on the desk, a reminder of why he could never stop. His voice was rarely heard, decisive, curt, focused. Behind his tailored suit and calm exterior, a fire burned brighter than ever. Yet the weight of each win felt heavier, the cost higher. Every choice marked the path upward, but also the isolation growing around him. The climb was relentless. Each morning greeted him with tighter deadlines and colder boardrooms. He pitched ideas with precision and grit, ignoring the fatigue that clawed at his eyelids. Invitations to dinners, weekends, and friendships were declined or forgotten, replaced by endless meetings and hostile negotiations. The loneliness settled in like a second skin, a quiet reminder that ambition demanded solitude. The few who remained close were wary, shadows of former allies. One night, under the flicker of city lights, he whispered into his phone, "I can't do this forever." Silence met him. The ambition to build a legacy was both his armor and his cage. The cost was no longer just sleep or friends. It was fragments of himself, lost to the grind. The skyscraper's lights blurred beyond the window as he wrestled with the price of his dreams. Victories came, small but crucial. The man signed deals that pushed his company closer to the apex. Yet each win felt oddly empty. Birthdays passed unnoticed, lovers became ghosts in his memory, and friendships frayed at the edges. In the quiet of his penthouse, he stared at the skyline, wondering what he had sacrificed. He recalled a woman's laugh, light and unburdened, once close, now distant. He reached for the phone but hesitated. Vulnerability was a risk he could no longer afford. Success was a fortress built on sacrifice, and the walls around him felt cold and unyielding. The ache of isolation gnawed beneath his composed exterior. He was growing, yes, but at what price? The weight of power bore down every choice a step further from the boy he once was. One evening, the man sat alone in a quiet restaurant, surrounded by murmurs and clinking glasses, but feeling utterly invisible. The seat across from him was empty, a reminder of love and friendship lost. He replayed conversations, bitter apologies left unsaid, and moments he'd never reclaim. The coldness in his chest was sharper than the finest crystal glass before him. Success had brought him everything, wealth, power, recognition, but it had hollowed his heart. He whispered to the empty chair, "I'm sorry." No answer came, only the soft music and distant laughter. The man's reflection caught in the polished window looked back, tired, worn, and yearning for something more. The climb was steep, and though he had reached heights few could imagine, the price was isolation. He realized then that the empire he built was a cage, and he was its prisoner. Despite the solitude, the man refused to stop. Every dawn found him back at his desk, fingers flying across keyboards, mind racing with strategy and vision. He pushed harder, knowing that every sacrifice was a brick in the foundation of the empire his mother had dreamed he'd build. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet fear festered, the fear that success might come too late or mean too little. He held onto the photograph of his mother tightly, a talisman against the dark nights. He wondered if the cost was too high, if the boy who promised never to be powerless was losing himself in the empire he sought to command. But the fire in his eyes still burned. For all the losses, all the empty victories, he believed one day the price would be worth it. And so, with clenched jaw and steady breath, he carried on, chasing a dream forged in pain and hope. The foundation cracked beneath the empire. In a stark boardroom, the billionaire sat rigid, the weight of a secret suffocating him. His co-founder, a man he once trusted implicitly, was revealed to be his estranged brother, a fact buried under years of lies and ambition. The revelation hit like a hammer, shattering illusions. Every handshake, every late night, strategy session suddenly twisted with betrayal. His voice caught as he confronted the sibling, the air thick with years of resentment. The empire was never truly his alone. The sibling's eyes, cold and unrepentant, mirrored a shared past neither wanted to admit. The billionaire's mind raced. How many moments had been stolen? How much of his success was borrowed or poisoned? The room fell silent, save for the cold drip of the corporate clock. The empire trembled not from external foes, but from blood. Days later, the billionaire uncovered more. A mentor he idolized had siphoned funds, betraying trust under the guise of guidance. The numbers didn't lie, each transaction a knife in the back. The man who shaped his vision was a thief cloaked in wisdom. Rage and despair collided inside him. He replayed conversations, seeking signs missed, feeling every trust unravel. The betrayal was not just financial, but deeply personal. The mentor's cold excuses fell on deaf ears as the billionaire realized how fragile his empire truly was. Behind every victory lurked shadows of deception. Alone in his office, he stared at the ceiling, knowing the fallout would shake everything: loyalties, futures, and the very legacy he fought so hard to build. The final blow was cruel and silent. The billionaire discovered he was gravely ill, a diagnosis he kept locked away from everyone. The ticking clock was no longer metaphorical. The empire's walls closed in, every breath a reminder of time lost. He struggled to mask his pain from his team, hiding weakness beneath a mask of resolve. The sickness gnawed at his body, but also at his spirit, threatening to unravel everything. Alone in his penthouse, he traced the path of his rise, each triumph shadowed by this secret collapse. He knew the end was near, but not before one last fight. The truth was his burden to carry, his silent war against mortality and legacy. As the diagnosis settled like a shadow, the billionaire's world fractured. Board members whispered, sensing weakness. Allies calculated their own gains. The empire he built on sacrifice and pain now trembled on the edge of collapse. He faced choices no man wants: reveal the truth and risk ruin, or carry the burden alone and fight a losing battle. The weight of legacy pressed heavier than ever. His thoughts turned to the woman he once loved, the child who waited beyond the glass, the promises made in quieter times. He found himself whispering apologies to ghosts, grappling with the impossible. To save the empire or save himself. The walls of the glass tower seemed to close tighter, suffocating, beautiful, and brutal. In a rare moment of vulnerability, the billionaire reached out to the small boy, the one who had always been his anchor. A meeting arranged in a quiet park, away from cameras and crowds. The boy, now a young man, approached cautiously, the years and distance heavy between them. The billionaire's voice cracked as he spoke, words long held back, confessions of failure, love, and hope. For the first time, masks fell away. The past and present collided in that fragile embrace. The empire's collapse no longer mattered. What remained was raw, human, and redemptive. A promise to rebuild, not just fortunes, but trust, family, and hearts. The boy's eyes held forgiveness, and the faintest spark of something new, hope. The boardroom was a battlefield. The billionaire stood at the center, his pale face a mask of resolve and exhaustion. Today, a vote would decide the fate of his legacy, the empire built with blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Around him, powerful executives exchanged cold glances, their loyalty uncertain. The air buzzed with tension, heavy with whispered ambitions and veiled threats. The billionaire's voice cut through the silence, steady but charged. "This company is more than numbers. It is our history, our future." His words hung between hope and despair. He knew the vote could destroy everything or save the last threads of what he fought to build. Each gaze was a judgment, each breath a challenge. In that moment, he was not just a CEO but a man pleading for redemption. The weight of a lifetime pressed down, personal and irrevocable. The room held its breath. The billionaire delivered his final speech, each word weighed with regret and fierce hope. "I stand before you not as a perfect man, but as one who has fought for this family, this company." His voice cracked slightly, the silence heavy with expectation. He spoke of sacrifices, of mistakes made in love and loss, and the vision that still burned bright despite the shadows. Faces softened, some nodded, others remained impassive. He cast a glance toward the boy-turned-man, now seated quietly at the back, a symbol of everything worth fighting for. The speech was his reckoning, a plea not just for the company's survival, but for forgiveness. In those moments, the man behind the empire shone through the polished veneer, raw and vulnerable. The boardroom was still, hearts held tight, waiting for the vote that would rewrite their future. The vote was cast, whispers rising into murmurs, fingers tapping on polished wood, eyes darting. The billionaire's heart thundered as ballots were counted, his future hanging in the balance. One by one, voices declared their choice, the weight of each decision palpable. When the final tally came, it was razor thin. The empire would survive, but barely. Relief washed over him, mingling with exhaustion and the bitter taste of victory. He knew this was not the end, but a fragile reprieve. The fight for legacy was far from over. Yet in that moment, surrounded by tentative allies, he allowed himself a flicker of hope. The empire could endure, but only if he found new strength and forgiveness. As applause broke the silence, his eyes searched the crowd, landing on the young man whose presence steadied him. The journey continued, scars deep but spirit unbroken. Later, away from the corporate glare, the billionaire found a quiet moment with the young man, the boy who had become his anchor and secret strength. They met in a sunlit garden, leaves rustling softly in the breeze. The billionaire's voice was gentle, carrying years of apology and love. "I failed you in ways I cannot undo, but I promise to build something better." The young man nodded slowly, eyes steady with forgiveness and resolve. The weight of their shared past hung between them, fragile but healing. Here was not a boardroom battle, but a personal reconciliation, a foundation for new beginnings. The billionaire understood that legacy was not just empires or power, but trust rebuilt and love renewed. The afternoon light warmed their faces, marking the start of a hopeful chapter. Silence was no longer absence but presence. As dusk settled, the billionaire stood alone on a rooftop, the city's lights twinkling like stars beneath him. He breathed deeply, feeling the cool night air against his skin. The weight of the past, the battles fought, and the losses endured pressed on him, but so did the fragile hope of redemption. In his hand, the faded photograph of his mother, his first love, his first promise. He whispered to the night, "This empire is not just mine. It's ours, built on love and sacrifice." Fireworks exploded silently in the distance, their colors reflecting in his eyes. The city pulsed with life below, endless possibilities, mingling with memories. Though the path ahead was uncertain, he knew one truth remained. He had never truly left her. In that moment, the billionaire was not alone. The future awaited, fragile and bright. The billionaire's empire had weathered storms, but nothing as profound as the changes within himself. He now walked a quieter path, stripped of the relentless hunger that once drove him. In the solitude of a modest office, surrounded by framed photographs of family and simple mementos, he reflected on what true success meant. The glass towers and boardrooms no longer defined him. Instead, the warmth of connection and the healing of fractured bonds became his new legacy. He spoke softly to the young man who sat across from him, the weight of years softened by understanding and forgiveness. They shared stories not of business conquests but of growth, redemption, and the fragile beauty of second chances. The billionaire understood that the greatest power lay not in wealth, but in love reclaimed and hope restored. Outside the corporate world's cold walls, the billionaire found himself reconnecting with life's simple pleasures. Morning light streamed through the kitchen window as he brewed coffee, the aroma grounding him in the present. He watched the city awaken below from a modest apartment, far removed from glass towers and steel. The young man prepared breakfast beside him, laughter echoing softly through the small space. No schedules, no boardroom battles, just two souls healing, learning to be present. The billionaire's gaze lingered on a worn photo of his mother on the windowsill, her smile a beacon in the quiet. The wounds remained, but the pain was gentler now, softened by acceptance. The journey had led him here, to a life of fragile peace and new beginnings. The billionaire and the young man took tentative steps toward rebuilding their relationship. They visited old haunts, the park where promises were first made, the quiet library filled with whispered memories. Each moment was a thread weaving together past and present. The billionaire listened more than he spoke, learning to be patient, to let forgiveness grow at its own pace. They shared silences that spoke louder than words, finding comfort in presence alone. The wounds of betrayal and loss remained, but they no longer defined the space between them. With every shared smile and gentle touch, the past's shadows receded, revealing the possibility of renewal. The empire's ruin had given birth to a deeper, more human connection. Though the billionaire had stepped back from the corporate world, his influence lingered. He mentored quietly now, guiding the next generation with humility rather than command. The young man flourished under this gentle tutelage, stepping into roles of leadership with newfound confidence. Together they rebuilt not just a company, but a culture rooted in trust and compassion. The billionaire watched with pride, tempered by wisdom, knowing true legacy was not measured in profits but in people. Late nights in the office gave way to evenings filled with laughter and shared meals. The past's scars had faded to quiet reminders, and a new chapter unfolded, one of healing, growth, and shared strength. One evening, the billionaire stood by a window overlooking the city lights, reflecting on the journey from power and isolation to love and humility. The young man joined him silently, placing a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity and hope. They watched as the city pulsed with life, a reminder that endings were often beginnings in disguise. The billionaire whispered, "I never thought I'd find peace here." The young man smiled. "You built more than an empire, you built a family." In that quiet moment, surrounded by soft light and distant stars, the billionaire felt the weight lift. The sacrifices, the losses, the pain, all had led to this fragile, beautiful resolution. The empire's true legacy was not wealth or power, but the bonds that endured beyond it. The final chapter began in silence. The billionaire stood before a mirror, his face etched with the years of battles won and lost. His eyes reflected not just the man he had been, but the man he had become, marked by regret, resilience, and a fragile hope. Behind him, the city stretched vast and endless, lights flickering like stars beneath a quiet sky. He whispered, "I left the company, but never left her." The words were a confession and a promise, binding past and present. In that stillness, the mirror no longer showed a titan alone, but a man tethered by love and memory. Outside, fireworks bloomed silently, their colors washing over glass towers and empty streets alike. It was a moment suspended between endings and beginnings, a final breath before the dawn. A child's hand reached up, small fingers brushing against the polished wood of a boardroom chair. The young man, once the boy who had watched from afar, now stood at the threshold of the empire. His gaze was steady, hopeful, carrying the weight of legacy and the lightness of new beginnings. The room was empty, save for the soft hum of life outside, a reminder that time moved on relentlessly. This was not just a seat of power, but a symbol of renewal, a chance to rewrite history with compassion and strength. The young man's breath caught as he sat, feeling the echoes of the past beneath him. He was no longer a shadow, but a bearer of light. The future was fragile, but his resolve was fierce. The billionaire and the young man met one last time beneath the city lights. Their eyes spoke volumes, of forgiveness earned and promises made anew. "You carry more than a name," the billionaire said softly. "You carry a chance." The young man smiled, understanding the depth beneath those words. Together they watched the city pulse with life, a testament to resilience and rebirth. The empire's true power was not in its walls or wealth, but in the hearts it touched and healed. For all the storms weathered, the final dawn held promise, a fragile, beautiful beginning shaped by love and sacrifice. The night wrapped around them like a gentle cloak, shielding hope from the cold. As fireworks erupted silently overhead, the billionaire looked into the young man's eyes, seeing the future reflected back. "We begin again," he said quietly, the words carrying the weight of every loss and every hope. The young man nodded, ready to carry the legacy forward, not as a shadow, but as a light. The city's heartbeat echoed their own, a rhythm of endings and new beginnings intertwined. The billionaire felt a peace he had never known, the burden lifted but the promise alive. Together, they stood beneath the sky, guardians of an empire rebuilt on trust, forgiveness, and love. The last spark faded, but the flame within burned steady and strong. The final scene was quiet, a child's hand reaching toward an empty boardroom chair, the light of a new day spilling through the windows. The billionaire's voice lingered like a whisper. He left the company, but never left her. A silent promise, a bridge between past and future. The chair waited, empty yet full of possibility. Outside, the city stirred awake, a world reborn in the fragile light of dawn. In that moment, endings dissolved into beginnings, and love became the true legacy. The story closed not with finality, but with an open door, inviting hope, renewal, and the promise that some bonds endure beyond time. The empire's heart beat on,